Chapter 14. What next? It had been an hour since Commander Sawyer's blood-pumping, adrenaline-charged speech, and the weight of the hours pressed on him. Gone were the days of operating under the familiar banner of the 138th Bravo Company. Now, he bore the mantle of leadership for the United Constitutional Militia, UCM. Although the name had changed, the faces around him remained the same, men bound by a sense of duty, honor, and a brotherhood forged in battle. The camp was a swirl of low conversations and restless energy. Every soldier in the UCM was grappling with the same haunting questions. How did they end up labeled as traitors? What had happened to the country they had sworn to defend? And more pressingly, would they ever return to their homes and loved ones? Commander Sawyer could feel the weight of their collective uncertainty, and he knew that in moments like these, leadership and direction were essential. The betrayal from the very government they served was a pill too bitter to swallow. But within the confusion, one thing remained crystal clear: their unwavering loyalty to the Constitution. It was the bedrock upon which the nation was built, and the foundation upon which they would now stand. Around a rugged table, covered with maps and reports, Sawyer sought to out their next move. Their new identity as the UCM presented a steep learning curve, especially with the ever-present shadow of uncertainty. But the determination in each man's eyes showed that they had the desire to defend the values and principles ingrained in the Constitution, irrespective of the odds. Fuel scarcity became their most pressing issue. The winding back roads and hilly terrain of the Ozarks had significantly drained their reserves. The luxuries of an organized supply chain were now a distant memory. Gone were the systematic protocols and resource channels they once had. Now, improvisation was the name of the game. Driving through the dense canopy of what seemed to be the Mark Twain National Forest, Sawyer noticed several secluded trails veering off the main road. An idea began to form. Grasping the radio's mic, he cleared his throat and addressed his team, formulating a new plan on the fly. "Ridge Runner, this is Cardinal. Over." He shook his head a little when he said his call sign. Leave it to Karnik, he thought. A few moments later, Sawyer received a reply. "Cardinal, this is Ridge Runner, over." "Ridge Runner, have you noticed the roads going off into the forest, the ones with gates blocking them? Over." "Cardinal, I sure have, and I have just the key for them. Over." Karnik could already tell what the commander was thinking. "Make it happen, Sergeant. Cardinal out." Karnik scrutinized several gated pathways before settling on one. He was intent on finding a path that delved deep enough away from the main thoroughfare, ensuring their convoy would remain hidden from any passerby. Overhead, the trees offered generous canopies, forming a natural veil that would shield them from aerial view, despite the conspicuous white buses they rode in. At the helm was Karnik, driving the hefty 5-ton truck. Though it was the largest of their convoy, its position at the front was determined not by its size, but by its pace. In the infantry, the ethos was simple. A unit is only as fast as its slowest member. This principle applied just as well to vehicles, ensuring that if the slowest took the lead, the rest of the convoy would never risk leaving it behind. As the hefty truck began to decelerate, Parker, seated next to Karnik, sprang into action. Vaulting out of the passenger side, he dashed to the rear of the truck, calling out for someone to hand him the bolt cutters stashed among their equipment. The limited space before the gate only allowed the 5-ton truck to pull in, leaving the buses momentarily exposed on the main road. Given the remote location, it was rare to see any passers-by. But in such tense situations, every ticking second felt agonizingly prolonged. Relief washed over Parker as the bolt cutters were swiftly handed to him, defying his expectation of a delay. With the cutters in his grasp, he sprinted to the gate, the metal tool seeming to struggle to keep pace with him. In no time, the lock was sheared open. The gate swung wide, and the convoy began its journey down the secluded path. As the vehicles faded into the distance, Parker quickly closed the gate, manipulating the severed lock to give the illusion of it being untouched. He took a moment to scan the surroundings, marveling at their good fortune of remaining unnoticed. With a sense of haste, Parker raced down the gravelly road to rejoin the militia. Sawyer recognized the importance of inventory. Decisions couldn't be made without knowing their resources. He raised his voice, cutting through the ambient sounds of nature. "Platoon leaders, on me!" He was confident that in this remote setting, only the rustling leaves and chirping birds would be privy to their discussions. Within the concealment of the dense thicket and the stillness of the remote hideaway, disciplined diligence of the 138th stood out. Trained instincts took over as they fortified their position, establishing a secure perimeter. The captured weapons once wielded by the MPs were now strategically distributed among them. For them, complacency was not an option. The events had reshaped their mission. They weren't just soldiers now. They were guardians of their land and liberty. Sawyer's heart swelled with pride as he observed their initiative. No command was needed. Their bond had strengthened in the face of adversity, their common goal becoming crystal clear. Yet with them stood another group, not originally part of the 138th, but saviors in their time of need, Darien and his crew. As Sawyer engaged with his platoon leaders, he couldn't help but glance towards them, noting their solidarity and camaraderie as they huddled near the rear of the 5-ton. Their presence added a new dimension to the evolving dynamics of the unit. "Darien," Sawyer said, just loud enough for Darien and those around him to hear, then made a motion with his hand for them to come over. "Darien, every one of us is very grateful for what the 5 of you have done," Sawyer said, taking the time to look each of the 5 standing before him separately in the eyes. He snapped to attention, and with a low, roaring voice, Sawyer issued the commands, "Group, attention!" When all the platoon leaders were at attention, Sawyer continued, "Ready arms." They all saluted and held it perfectly, presenting the salute with thanks to the 5 standing in front of them. "Order arms!" The commander and his platoon sergeants brought their arms down simultaneously. "Now I'm sorry," Sawyer continued, "but we have to get to business. First, I would like to know your plans." He was addressing the 5 standing before him. "None of you is obliged to stay, and—" Before he could get another word out, Sawyer was cut off by one of the 4 standing with Darien. "Sir, my name is Kate, and I served as an MP in the Army for 8 years. With the exception of Darien here, whom we only met this morning, all of us have served in the Army or Marines. When the shooting started, we met for the first time as we were drawing our concealed pistols and moving to the gunfire. Darien here saw us moving in and gave us a very quick rundown of what was taking place. After giving Darien my backup, we moved in, and you know the rest." Kate then paused and checked the expressions on each person in her audience's face before she continued, "Sir, the men and I heard your speech. We took the same oath as you, and we agree there is no other path. If what happened in St. Louis is a sign of what the government has become—" She paused before finishing, and then gave the commander a stone-cold stare. "We, too, are—" "Traitors, sir!" Commander Sawyer couldn't help but stare with some amusement at the 5 of them. He found it amusing how all 5 of them were on the same page, even with the age differences. Hell, Darien was only 16, and the oldest of the 5 was wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap. The new squad was truly one for a militia. "Okay," replied Sawyer. "Get a list of ranks, squad chain of command, and call signs to Sergeant Karnick, ASAP. For now, give me your platoon leader, and the rest are dismissed." As Sawyer had figured, Kate remained behind, and it was now time for planning. His first need was to have a complete inventory, personal items included. The men were trained to never go anywhere without their rucksacks, so they were all stacked in the back of the buses. This provided Sawyer with some comfort, as he knew that his men at least had that portion of their gear. After addressing the need for inventory and all digital devices to be turned in and checked for the possibility that they were being tracked, Sawyer moved on to the next step of the meeting. "Okay, now one thing we know we are going to need but don't have is fuel." Sawyer looked at each man and woman standing in front of him to make sure they were all focused on him before beginning again. "We cannot just stop and fuel up at a station or on a base, so where do we get it? Get back to me with options at, let's say, 1800 hours." He put the question out there, but knowing that there would be no point in wasting daylight, he dismissed the group to complete their given tasks. The number of men on the perimeter was reduced to 50-50, half on the line and half doing inventory. When it came to the gear on the buses, the task took little time to complete. Each rucksack had been inventoried before leaving the armory, so a master sheet was derived from the individual sheets attached to each ruck. The 5-ton was what interested Sawyer the most. He was concerned that after they had been taken into custody, their weapons and ammunition had become relocated. Sawyer knew most of what should be in the truck. He always made it a good practice to watch the weapons and ammunition being loaded, especially when they were transporting M406 high-explosive rounds for the M203 grenade launchers. Those, combined with the smoke grenades, opened up a great deal when it came to planning. They should also have 20,000 of 5.56 rounds for the M4 rifles, which was not nearly enough for each man to have even close to a full battle load of 240 rounds. Instead, it would only be a little over half that. Sawyer's 128 men were mostly expert marksmen, so he had no doubt they could make do. His main concern was that none of it would be in the truck, and that their time would be cut short. Sawyer normally let the men do the tasks he assigned and waited for the report, but not today. He had to know if they had the weapons. Before he thought twice about interfering with the inventory, Sawyer had already walked to the rear of the truck. Sawyer set his eyes upon a miracle. They had everything, including cases of MREs. It was now 1800 hours, and the platoon sergeants were already in the process of giving their reports to a very pleased commander. That was until the current fuel supply information was read. Both buses were down to a quarter tank, and the 5-ton truck was just under that. They estimated that they had fewer than 100 miles of travel before running out of fuel. After receiving the information, Sawyer was overcome with panic, although he certainly didn't show it on the outside. Rather than panic everyone, he said, but one word, recommendations. "Sir," one of the platoon sergeants replied, and then carried on. "Farms? Sure, most of the bigger ones have fuel delivered. We can find one and fill up." "Sergeant, that is a great idea," said Sawyer. But everyone could feel a but coming on next, and it did. "But we have limited miles on the vehicles and no idea where the next farm with fuel is located." You could almost hear a light sigh come from Sawyer before he spoke again. "Men, we are on our own. We don't even have the luxury of using the internet." Just then, Sawyer remembered something. "You did check your men for all cell phones and electronics that could be tracked, correct?" "Yes, sir," they all replied at once. Then Sergeant Carnick spoke up. "Sir, I didn't want to take any chances and had everyone with credit cards or IDs containing chips cut out the chips and destroy them. Sir, I would suggest checking your items for RFID chips." With care, Sawyer riffled through his wallet. Every card he examined seemed like a betrayal, a silent beacon that had possibly revealed their location. As he handed each card to Carnick, the quiet snip of the pocket knife felt like a small victory against surveillance. Discovering the chip in the new Real ID card was the ultimate shock. It was evident now why the push for this new identification system had been so aggressive. Their government, it seemed, was more focused on monitoring its citizens than trusting them. The chilling realization hit him. How many others were unwittingly being tracked? The implications of this went far beyond their current situation. It was an invasion, a silent war on personal freedom. As Sawyer pulled out the 5th chipped card, a cold dread washed over him. It wasn't just about their current predicament. It was about the larger game in play, one that made pawns of them all. "Sir, we might need to consider leaving the men and supplies here while we use the transport to scout for fuel," Kate proposed, her analytical mind having quickly assessed their dire situation. Sawyer paused, weighing the suggestion, then nodded. "You have a point, Kate, but we'll only send a small team. All essential supplies remain here. Everything else secure?" he asked all 5 of his platoon sergeants. After receiving the reply he was expecting from all of them, he began, "Okay, this is how I see it. Not all of us are going on the fuel run. I'm not going to jeopardize everything for this." Sawyer watched each of his platoon leaders and looked for how they all reacted to his plan as he laid it out. "I will be taking the vehicles and 2 drivers and a few others," Sawyer said. All 5 platoon sergeants said, "Sir." "As you were," Sawyer growled, bringing the opposition to an end, at least for now. "When we break from this meeting, have your men remove everything from the buses and the 5-ton. Leave nothing. Take out the radios, except for the one in the 5-ton. Sawyer could tell that this plan was not sitting well with the platoon sergeants. Each one of them wanted to be the one to go on the mission in his place. "I will drive one of the buses and keep you apprised. Should we not return?" He paused, deep in thought. "Should we not return by 2200 hours, or should we be compromised? You are to move on by foot. Keep to the woods. Each platoon will move in different directions. Gather men and supplies to continue the fight. Do not surrender. Any questions?" No sooner had Sawyer asked this than he retracted it. "Hold it," he said, as once again "sir" had become a group word. "No questions, just break and get your men moving." Sergeant Karnik was standing at the door of his bus as Sawyer approached. Sawyer put up his hand to stave off any protest to his leading the mission. To his surprise, Karnik stood there and replied, "Have a smooth ride, sir." "Damn kraut," was all Karnik heard as Sawyer passed him to climb up in the bus. Sawyer was ready. This would be the first of what he hoped would be many missions the UCM would embark upon. He shut the door, fired up the bus, and grabbed the radio mic. "Light fighter, this is Cardinal. Over." "Cardinal, this is Light fighter. Over." "Cardinal is moving out. Over." "See you in a few, Cardinal. Over." "Roger that. Cardinal out." Now that they had notified his makeshift TOC, Tactical Operations Command, that they were off and running. Sawyer was in the lead bus, followed by Kate in the second, and she was followed by Sergeant Holbrook in the 5-ton. Within a mere 15 minutes, supplies had been handed out to the men and everything was packed up. They were back on the road in 20. Every minute on the road amplified the tension. The sound of the engines became a constant reminder of the dwindling fuel reserves. The vast expanse of trees on either side, which would have been a comforting sight on any other day, now only served as a constant reminder of their isolation. Every tick of the clock felt like an indictment, a loud reminder of the potential price of delay. Reaching the main road brought a brief sigh of relief for Sawyer, but the looming fuel crisis soon eclipsed that fleeting moment of calm. As minutes turned into half an hour with no gas station in sight, anxiety gnawed at him. The thick trees lining the road seemed to mock him, standing tall and unyielding, while the fuel gauge continued its inevitable descent. The desolate expanse gave no hint of salvation, and doubt began to cloud Sawyer's mind. Would they find fuel before it was too late? "At least we are infantry. Walking is our main source of transportation," Sawyer said, and let out a visible smirk. "Sir!" It was Specialist Parker. Sawyer received a rush of adrenaline from the sudden outburst. When he turned, Parker was walking quickly up the aisle toward him. "Sir, I know where we can get the fuel we need." "Back there, sir," Parker said with excitement hanging on every word. "Where isn't back there, Specialist? I saw nothing but trees." "Sir, back there, there's a highway department maintenance garage just off the main road. They typically have fuel tanks for their machinery," Parker offered, his voice steady and assured. Sawyer locked eyes with Parker, then quickly glanced up at his platoon sergeant standing just behind. Aware that they were running on borrowed time and couldn't afford any missteps, Sawyer looked for affirmation. The nod he received from his sergeant settled him slightly, prompting him to reach for the radio. "Ridge Runner, this is Cardinal. Over." Karnik soon replied, "Go for Ridge Runner. Over." "Ridge Runner, same as before. Find us another area. Out." Sawyer knew that he didn't need to go into details with Karnik. As he set down the mic to the radio, he turned back to Parker. "Let's find out, Specialist.